Hi, this is Kevin Kraut, Ogden Kraut's son. There's a topic here that kind of came about by kind of a weird spiritual mean. There is a book called The Challenge of Our Times by Cleon Skousen. In 1953 this was published. It's a rare book. You don't see it very much. I've copied a little part out of this, and it's called Did the Early Christians Practice Communism? And so I'm going to read this real quick because it's really important. And this is what we see happening in the Mormon fundamentalist groups. We see this in all kinds of people trying to live a united order or a united effort. It kind of turns into communism. And I've tried to explain this to people and they don't quite understand. What do you mean communism? Isn't it united order? So I was doing a lot of trying to explain this, but this explains it better than I could. So this is what it says. Did the early Christians practice communism? Today we live in an age of pressure and haste when people must read as they run and think when they can, usually amidst a dozen distractions. Consequently, many find it convenient to let other people with more time for study do their thinking for them. This is helpful but dangerous. Sometimes it leads to widespread acceptance of concepts which are entirely erroneous. Tonight we're going to discuss one of those problems which has grown up through centuries of misunderstanding and heaped confusion upon our own generation because very few people have taken time to study it. This problem may be stated in tonight's question: did the early Christians practice communism? Well, here's a question. What is communism? In the minds of many people, communism simply means the vesting of all property in the community. It means that the individual gives up all claim to his property and thereafter shares his goods and his labor with the other members of that society. All this sounds like a very good system of true brotherhood. Unfortunately, however, when this system has been practiced, men have found that it contains unavoidable problems which always destroy brotherhood. For example, communism requires that a small group of leaders be given supreme power to dictate to the individual members of the society what they think is best for the group. In fact, in the absence of a strong centralized authority, communist systems promptly fall apart. Historically, the existence of this central authority has always led to friction and rebellion. This has usually been met by suppression of minorities who attempted to rebel. So what starts out as a brother ends up with the imprisonment for any who oppose the small group of men who stand at the head of the community. The second problem in communism which destroys brotherhood is the fact that the system must be geared to a slow pace. The more progressive members feel inhibited because they are impeded. Soon they want to free themselves from this unnatural restraint so they can function more rapidly and efficiently. They soon learn, however, that because they are a minority, they are forced to accept things as they are. This creates a smoldering resentment which may eventually explode. In all communist countries today, the ruling class has found it necessary to meet this danger by setting up powerful police systems and sending impatient progressives to concentration camps. Okay, the third problem inherent in communism, and which makes it difficult for men to remain brothers, is the restraint of individual taste and creative expressions. Communism has a tendency to set strict standards for diet, clothing, housing, art, improvement, employment, transportation, music, literature, and even science, which may be entirely obnoxious to individuals' tastes and desires. Because communism is a controlled society, these standards are always restrictive, and citizens of communist societies, both ancient and modern, complain of the irrational and resentment resulting from the restriction of creative expression. Okay, so what do communists say about these problems? Now, advocates of communism do not deny the problems we have just mentioned. They honestly admit them. That is why Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and other associates were quickly to point out that a communist society could not survive without a militant force to put it in power and then keep the members of the group subservient to the dictates of those in charge. Lenin made this very clear when he said, "Those who are opposed to armed uprising, those who will not prepare for it, must be ruthlessly cast out of the ranks of the supporters of the revolution and sent back to the ranks of its enemies." The day is approaching when the force of events and conditions of the struggle will compel us to separate enemies from friends according to this principle. Lenin, of course, is here referring to the principle of armed force. Nevertheless, there are those who still feel that somehow our Christian brotherhood could make communism work without force. In the past, a multitude of experiments have been made by well-meaning individuals who set up communist societies. All of these, however, found the problems we have mentioned so difficult that they either abandoned the system or altered it to such a degree that it was communism in name only and not in practice. Therefore, brings us to a deeper appreciation of the significance of our question for discussion tonight. If the early Christians practiced communism, as many have supposed, how were they able to make it work? No one else since that time has been able to keep communism alive without violating the basic ethics of Christian teachings. In fact, what is the basic thinking for that the early Christians practiced communism? This is what the scriptures say. The sum total of the evidence in the scriptures may be found in 2 verses of the book of Acts. Acts 2:44 and 45 reads, "And all that believed were together, and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men, as every man had need." If we interpret the phrase, "all things common," as meaning that they pulled everything together and placed title in the group, then the next verse is a direct contradiction. For it says they went ahead and sold their properties so as to have the means of helping those in need. But let us turn to the second passage, which is found in Acts 4:32, which reads, "And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and one soul, neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common." Notice that this verse implies that each Christian kept his individual property, but said it was for the benefit of the whole group. Now, it is one thing to lose control of your property and the private incentive which goes with it by turning it over to a communist society. It is quite another thing to keep legal title to your personal possessions, but treat them as a stewardship under God, which you are duty-bound to develop for the benefit of yourself and your brethren in Christian community. Turning all your property over to the community is communism. But treating your property as a sacred stewardship is not. Now, which procedure did these early Christians follow? Did the early Christians practice communism or the stewardship principle? The next chapter of Acts gives the answer. There we have a description of the procedure which was followed by the Ananias and his wife in contributing to the church for the benefit of those in need. The scripture says that Ananias and his wife had a piece of property which they desired to sell in order to provide money which they could give to the apostles. Now, if these Christians had been practicing communism, Ananias would have turned the property over to the group for appropriate disposition. But this is not what happened. Ananias, as owner of the property, sold it on his own initiative. But after selling, he and his wife decided they would hold back part of the amount, although they would pretend that they gave all the proceeds from the sale. When they came to Peter, the Spirit of the Lord touched his understanding so that he knew of their deceit. He turned upon the two of them in righteous indignation. Now listen to what he said to Ananias and his wife, because his words indicated the attitude of the apostles towards property belonging to the members of the Christian community. Peter said, "While the property remained, was it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not in thine own power?" In other words, the decision of selling and retaining the property rested with Ananias and his wife, and when they had sold the property to make the contribution, it was still up to them to decide how much they would contribute. Their sin was in pretending they were giving the whole proceeds of the sale when in fact they had withheld part of it. It seems clear from this incident that when the members of the early Christian community said that what they possessed was not their own, they simply meant that they looked upon their property as a stewardship and treated it for the common good of all. If they had a good profit, they shared liberally with their brethren. If they had a meager profit, they shared what they could afford. Or, to put it another way, they had all things in common